Friday afternoon. You got anything fun going on this weekend?
Nope. Halloween
Dude,
Halloween parade with the toddler. That's what you get to look forward to.
I think I'm getting out of Halloween scot free this year, so I'm excited about that. Although it's fun, I either go 100 or 0. Dress up as the Joker with the face paint and everything, go to 3 parties, or nothing. Stay inside, watch some scary movies. I'm going to MMA fight tonight, dude.
Whoa. What fight?
One of my girlfriend's buddies is like a MMA fighter, so it's like a local
Wow.
tournament up in Astoria. Pretty sweet. I'm pretty excited about it.
Local tournament. This sounds like it's just like you're gonna walk into a warehouse and there's just gonna be people, throwing
It's like the beginning
punches
of
and
Spider-Man,
yeah.
bone saw.
Someone's gonna point at you and be like, "You're next."
Yeah, right. No, he's pretty good though. I've seen some of his YouTube stuff, so it'll be fun. I've never been to a fight before actually, so I love sports, so it should be fun.
Cool. Nice. Awesome.
All right, let's get into it. We got some fun things on the docket today. We've got some Cloudflare Tunnel local dev stuff that you wrote about. We have a little segment we want to do about Purity and the React compiler, giving us some new helpful error messages about the rules of React. And Next Conf was yesterday, and there was some cool stuff that came out. Maybe we'll have time for. Maybe we'll get to next week. But there's some fun stuff happening in React and Nextland. So yeah, fun docket today.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, just to get started, I set up a Cloudflare tunnel for my local development, and it's pretty cool. What it does is Cloudflare tunnels. You point a domain at Cloudflare, and then you can download this program and run it on your computer, and it basically creates like a reverse tunnel, a reverse proxy to Cloudflare servers to your domain, and then you can set up all these vanity URLs to different ports on your computer. So you can do like, nextjs dot ryantoronto.com, and that's going to point to my Next.js app. Local
Wow.
is 3000. I can do like
Yep.
remix dot, all these things. So you can just set up all these vanity URLs.
Wow.
And they all route through Cloudflare, and they all serve from your computer. And there's some pretty cool stuff here. So first is, man, it makes testing on mobile devices so much easier. Like just that alone, like, having to find your like local IP address, copy it, go over to your iPhone, paste it in, just even though
Add the port.
even though Apple streamlines the copy and paste process, it's just all that just kills friction, and I never want to test on a mobile device. But with this Cloudflare tunnel, I can just keep it running 24/7, and I just boot up a Next app, and I go over to my phone and can pull it up and see how it looks. So,
You can just type in like buildui.dev or something.
yeah, exactly. It's a host name, so I would do like ryan.buildui.com.
Got you.
Route to me. That, for anyone out there, that's not what routes to me, so don't go try it. But, yeah,
because it's live on the internet.
It's live on the internet. Yeah.
Wow.
You can set up all these rules, like the host name. You can do like firewall rules, what IP address you want to add. Cloudflare, it routes through Cloudflare, and like one of Cloudflare's big offering is like caching and caches. So if your local host starts serving things like images or JavaScript files or CSS with cache control headers, then they get cached in Cloudflare. So it's actually like really, really fast when you start pulling it up on a phone. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And just, again, I just like it for like the vanity URL, quick and easy to access. But yeah, I just wanted to share that Cloudflare tunnels are free. If your domain is hosted, if your DNS is hosted at Cloudflare. Wow. I guess the only downside is that the thing on Mac OS, it runs as a service. So if you keep it running on your computer, like you always have port 3000 or whatever your rules are exposed. So, yeah, I try to stop it, especially if I'm like, doing like client work or whatever. Don't always remember. So it's just, it's just good to keep in mind. I wish there was, what I really want is I want like a little menu bar app that I can just like press a button and it everything goes live, and then I can kill it. And you could probably make something that just started and stopped the service.
Yeah.
But anyway, Just wanted to
That's
share that.
cool. I was hoping that you were going to end up somewhere like what the Laravel guys have because they have vanity URLs built into, I think it's like Herd or something like that, which is some like an app that helps you set up a new Laravel app and it orchestrates everything. It's like UI for like this Postgres table, this code base, this service is running, right?
Hmm.
Background job worker. And they have vanity URLs, but they're local. So it's you have to be on the
Yeah.
Wi-Fi network. So you'd have to ngrok it if I wanted to share it with you or something. But for most workflows, I think it's probably totally fine, and that lets you do something like build UI.local,
Yes.
which would be awesome if Next had something like that because your passwords manager and your autocompletes are not all your cookies are not all getting crammed into localhost 3000 for
Yeah.
every app that you work on. So I was hoping that
You
that's where you're going to end up, but maybe
Cookies
it's a
is
slightly
such a
different
good
tool.
one. Cookies is such a good one because if you open up Cookies on localhost 3000, you just see 7 apps just all merged
Yeah.
into one, and you're
Yeah,
just firing them to every app you've ever worked on.
exactly.
Well, the vanity URLs are nice, and I've been playing with it. I mean, I guess the vanity URLs would be get the cookies from all the apps you run on that URL, so it doesn't solve that. But I've
Right.
been playing with like
Right.
setting up new URLs.
Nice.
Oh, webhooks. So another reason I was testing our Stripe webhook.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and so webhooks can actually point back to your computer
Oh,
now.
cool.
And I know there's tons of software out there that like that's made for webhooks that automatically set up this reverse proxy thing, but yeah, just having one URL, it's like a
It's closer
DNS
to
record.
production.
Yes. Yep.
There's fewer differences between your test environment and your production environment.
Yep.
So that's awesome.
Yep. Yeah, it's a public
It even made
URL
me
for your computer.
right. That's great. That's great. Very cool, man. I'll have to check it out. Sweet. So the React compiler came out into beta, and you had a chance to play around with it, and you were sharing some of the messages that it was sending you in dev. We I saw Lauren Tan's talk at ReactConf this year, and I was really impressed with it. It was really cool. They were working on some UI to show you, like in your editor, which functions were being optimized. If a function couldn't be optimized, why not? So it was all really interesting to me. It didn't feel as useful or practical or for the kind of work we do because, listeners of the show will know we don't like premature optimization, and so we try not to ever use memo or use callback unless it solves the problem. And I mean, I think I've written it like once or twice,
Hmm.
but it's easy to overdo it. We see in the community, and so that part was not as interesting to us right away, but there are some really cool things because the compiler understands React code more than it understands React, not syntax, but the programming model of React in a way that is more restrictive than just JavaScript control flow, JavaScript rules and syntax. And one of those would be, for example, not calling a use state in a conditional. That's something that um, JavaScript lets you call a function inside of a conditional, but if you do that in React, you are going to have a bad time. And another one is reading or writing to refs during render. And so you whipped up a little example that showed what happens when you do that, how you would get no feedback from your dev environment, your editor, or your browser app if you did that today. But if you turn the compiler on, it tells you that you're breaking one of those rules. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Compiler's really easy to set up. It's a Babel plugin that does the actual compilation step. And then there's an ESLint rule you can run in your editor or when you run, npm run lint that's going to tell you if you have any code, like referencing a ref during render, that the compiler won't be able to compile this code. So it's basically like it's warning you have a bug, there's something wrong, go and fix it. But yeah, if you can set up a Babel plugin and you can set up ESLint, then it takes about 10 minutes to get this thing running.
It's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, I think one of the nice ones So I guess there's like a few things that I'm excited about this. I agree with you that like we're not interested in the optimization stuff. Also, too, like I just don't work on. I don't have like a 2,000 line component that needs to be optimized. My components are simple, a lot of like data fetching, CRUD operations, just not a lot of moving pixels. Mostly apps I work on. Also with just sort of things we've seen in the past, it's not that we're against optimization. We think that optimization is often the wrong thing to focus on when you're writing a React app. So going in and it's much better spend brain cycles on building the right UI than going through and thinking, should I wrap this object in a use memo because it prevents one extra render? So, uh, but I love that the compiler gets to remove all that. If you're using the compiler, you no longer have to answer that question because the
Absolutely.
compiler, takes care of all of it for you.
Absolutely. I had a conversation with Tanner Lindsley at React Conf, and he was talking about this. And he's an example of the kind of person who works on code that runs into this sort of thing all the time since he's a library author and everyone in the world uses his libraries. So you can imagine writing a tan stack table that has a huge amount of rows and people are rendering all sorts of components in each cell across all those rows. The composition of React lets you easily add crazy amounts of UI anywhere you want. So you could imagine like a very data dense display in a table, and cells have, radix drop downs in them. So you resort or you reorder the table and all of those things. Maybe they're setting up listeners. Maybe they're measuring. Maybe they're calling get bound client rect on the DOM, which is expensive. Again, not expensive. You're just doing it in one part of your screen. Not expensive enough to care about it. But if you're doing it in hundreds of
Mm-hmm.
rows, it might become expensive. And so his users experience that sort of thing a lot, where they resort or reorder, and they get like a stutter just because it's literally like CPU bound rendering of the new table. And so over the years, he's had a lot of folks ask for ways to like avoid rendering. And he basically went down that path for a little bit. And then basically the next phase was like spending a lot of time educating people that basically this is their responsibility and he shouldn't be adding anything to React tan stack table to deal with this sort of thing since it's kind of a general problem. And when he heard about the compiler, he was like, this is amazing because I'm not going to have to think about doing this inside of my code or educate people on this at all. So I think that is a really cool, really, really cool way to think about the benefits, how they were able to layer a compiler on top of React's APIs and designs without having us to do anything else.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible. So I'm looking forward to hearing some stories from those trenches, from those kinds of folks once this thing really goes mainstream. Um,
While
so
while we're
yeah,
on
yeah.
this, while we're on this,
Hmm.
I would love like the minimal example of like what do I need to do that's like easy to hold in my head but does create that stutter,
Right.
and it for any reason, measuring DOM or whatever, and then yeah, seeing what that looks like in compiler. And it's funny because like I just know the compiler is going to fix it. Like I
Right.
just know you like flip on the thing and it's just going to be
Right.
fixed. So it's
It's
pretty
kind of like
cool.
Ryan Florence's DBMon thing. That was an example of
Yes, that was a great example.
CPU bound UI, and all of the stuff that Ember was doing was like too expensive in that case. It was like pathological case for Ember at the time, and I remember Ember making some updates and basically statically pulling things out, and it fixed it. But again, this is an example of being able to fix even worse cases without having to change anything. It's really cool when they can pull this off.
Cool. So
We want to
so
talk about the ref thing.
yeah, so one of the things like as I was playing with this, I was looking through like the ESLint rules, and one of them was like you can't reference you can't read or write from refs during render. And this is a rule I think like if you've seen like the rules of hooks, there was like a gist that was floating around for a while. I believe this was mentioned in
Sebastian's
that.
rules of React.
Yeah, I think this was mentioned in that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's kind of interesting that now you get a lint rule that tells you you can't do this, and I think that's great. it'd be,
You tweeted about it, and people were confused. People didn't understand why.
yeah, people didn't understand why. And I didn't really know like the best way to explain it. Um, I can come up with like scenarios with like suspense and transitions where like you modify a ref and then someone starts reading it from render and it gets out of sync or something. But just like in just a very basic vanilla like React app, why is it bad? I want to turn it over to you. Why is it bad to read from refs during render?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting because it's like the rules of React are kind of like this implicit thing that have been floating around, and now we're seeing it made more explicit. But I don't even know if the React docs have anything about this.
They don't. I
Um,
looked. I don't think they do, or at least not
yeah.
in the rules section that I looked at. They might. I didn't check the ref section. I'm not sure on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the way I like to think about this is, let's try to think of the simplest example. I think examples don't even need suspense transition at all. I think one of the ones we always think about is um, a good example of setting um, a ref. Ref is kind of like ref is even harder to think about because let's just take an example of doing something you're not supposed to in render, which would be setting the document title. You render the component, it's blog post one, and you just do document.title equals blog post one. Um, Maybe something like document.title equals
Yeah.
blog post one, or equals the current time. Um, these are like impurities. The React docs talk a lot about impurities and pure functions, but if you ever do something like document.title equals in the render in the render part in part of your render function, um, you've made your component impure, and um, maybe the new date is a little bit easier because everyone can imagine when you render the app, if you were to return like a p tag and just put new date in it, um, you'll just see whatever the date was at the time that it was rendered. But you can imagine dropping two or three more of those components and seeing different dates, right? Um, if the date updated and you wanted to reflect that, you would put that in state, right? Setting state is a way to communicate to React that it needs to re-render. So that's why if you just deal with like a plain JavaScript variable or an object that's on the window global, React doesn't know about it. Lately, we've been talking about how like there's this like React world, and there's ways that you communicate with React about things that have changed, and then there's everything else. When you run a new React app and you move your mouse position around, your mouse has different XY coordinates every time you move the cursor, but React doesn't know about that. Um, this is where things like use effect comes in, and then ultimately setting state to get all of that information back into React in a way that it can lead to a predictable output, right? So this is all like UI as a function of state, and making sure that all of the changing state that affects our UI, all of the changing data that affects our UI is actually inside of React state is what makes React React. It's what makes it fun to work with. It's what makes it predictable. Um, the single data flow, one way data flow, and explicitly marking when things are inside of React that affect our JSX output, our return value, and when those things change. That's what makes React like work. And when components are authored in a way that's well behaved, that abide by those rules, they compose together very well. And so I can drop in uh, an animated counter that takes state from your app, and anytime that state changes, if the animated counter is written correctly, um, it's always just going to work. And I think this idea of composition is like the most important philosophical principle of React, the design of React, all the APIs. And I think that's what has led to React success and libraries like Shad, CN, Radix, Headless UI, Aria, Framer Motion, and all of these things working together in ways that just compose very naturally. And purity is basically one of the most important reasons why these things all work. So Why don't you just call new date or set document.title during render? Because it makes your function, your component, impure, which means that if you give it the same inputs, you're going to get a different output. So there's no notion of an input of the date, but if you render that component 3 times, it results in a different output. So that's an impure component. So now when we think about refs, what is a ref? Well, a ref is a way for you to explicitly leave React. Because when I create a ref, it's as if I'm creating a new property on window. So window.x equals foo. If I just did that in my root app, and then I have 2 subcomponents that render window.x, any React developer should be able to understand that if I start changing window x, we're going to see inconsistent values. Those components won't re-render. If we render something after the value has changed, the earlier ones won't know about it. They'll show different things, right? So everyone kind of understands why x should be in state. Well, a ref is effectively just state that is like a property that React doesn't know about. It is like a little mutable box of state that you are explicitly opting into because you need to do something outside of render. And so that's kind of it. If you think about what I just said, now you say, well, we shouldn't read or write to refs during render. It's exactly the same reason as why you shouldn't set global variables or read global variables inside of render. It's going to lead to inconsistent outputs. It's also going to make your components not participate in the data flow of the overall larger application. It's going to make your components not work and compose inside of other component trees. And so that's basically, like, I think refs are kind of magical and they seem complicated, but really they're just variables that are floating around that React has no idea about where they are, what they are, and when they change.
Yeah, that was good. I think it's a simpler view here. You render something. You render the date, right? When the date changes, you want to re-render and update the date. Like when you have that contract, there's just going to be less bugs in your code. If you like set some variable on window, like window.x equals 1, 2, 3, and then you render, and then you set window.x to 4, 5, 6, well, that component didn't re-render after you set it. So it still says 1, 2, 3. And you as a developer sitting there scratching your head saying, like, I just set it to 4, 5, 6. Why didn't it re-render? React doesn't know about it. React isn't watching every single property in the browser and seeing if you rendered it and then if it changed. It only knows about things like start simple, things like props and state. So if you want your UI to update when things change, you have to use state or you have to use props. And
this is good. We're kind of figuring it out because I'd like to make a YouTube video about this, but it is hard to explain. But I do think that's a good place to start.
So the only way React knows that it needs to update pixels is if you use props or state. And there's some like a context fits in here, but let's just say
no, that's basically it, because the only way context can affect rendering is if it's in state, right?
Yeah,
it's an implicit prop.
It's an implicit prop from state. But I just want you to think more like props and state are what tell React to re-render. Why do you care about this? Because it allows you to make changes and then have a guarantee that the UI is going to have those changes. Because we've all had like those bugs where we're not using a system like React and we make some data change and then the data is changed in JavaScript, but it doesn't show up on the screen. And we have to we have to go imperatively call some like render function to figure this out. And React solves all of this, but it can only solve
literally the reason that React was created was the notifications were out of sync with in the toolbar in the header of Facebook from what they were in the messenger, you know?
Yeah. And so this is how you get that guarantee. You get this guarantee that the screen is always going to reflect the state if you use state and props. As soon as you go outside of state and props, React can't guarantee anything. So like there's no rule that says like you can't put data on the window object if you're writing a React app. But the rule is that like React isn't going to re-render. And if React happens to re-render and you're reading from window while it re-renders, then yeah, guess what? You're going to introduce like bugs and a really complicated app with lots of components. Like these bugs are like, yeah, we've all run into them. They're like huge head
Mm-hmm.
scratchers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at this point, it's like you said, like React developers, we kind of know not to put stuff on window. We use state and props. State and props is what tells React to re-render. Refs, though, feel different than window because refs are something that React created. React knows about them. I created it in my component. It's not like ref is this thing that exists on the browser
I
and
imported useRef from React.
I imported useRef from React and I called useRef during render. So why doesn't React know about refs? It created the ref. It created the ref in the
It's a good
component.
question. Another way to say that is why not just use window? Let's say, why would you use ref over using window? Maybe because it's scoped to the component.
Bingo. So first to answer why doesn't React know about your refs? Well, a ref is a contract that we are going to give you a piece of state that you can put data in, but it's not going to cause re-renders. We're not going to observe it for re-renders. You can put data in it, but we're not going to watch it. If you need something for us to watch, use state, not use ref. Then the next question is like, well, why do you need to give me something if you're not going to watch it? Why can't I just put it on window? And React says, well, you probably want something that's associated with the component instance. If
Nice.
you put it on window and you render one component, yeah, it's going to work fine. But as soon as you
Nice.
render a second version of that component, now you have two components clobbering the same piece of global state. So it's
Nice.
not it's not that like React doesn't know about your refs. It does know about your refs. It created the ref. It's more it's a place for you to stash state and it doesn't trigger re-renders. And you do need this for certain patterns you develop in React, like getting the elements of your DOM. You can pass a ref to them, get that set on the ref. That shouldn't trigger a re-render. It doesn't have anything to do with re-rendering, but it gives you access to an element of your component. And so this is like the kind of thing. So React knows about your refs. It wants you to use them. It wants you to associate with them the component, but it doesn't want to trigger re-renders for them. And
Right. The thing
therefore,
that's stable about it that React knows is that it is a reference.
to this,
It's a stable reference to
associate with this component.
associate with this component, which is the thing that React knows about it. But that's all it knows about it.
Right.
And it knows that it can clean it up once that component is no longer rendered.
Yes. Another great point. But it has nothing to do with re-rendering. So if you
Right.
start changing data if you start reading from it or writing to it during render, then you are introducing the same types of bugs that if you start reading to or writing to data on window. That it's
That's
just
a good way to. That's a great way to put it.
you are just like relying on when this component was rendered, and yeah,
And you break composition because if I wrote a component that's using window dot time, current time, and I update it, I need to update it every minute, and then I install a library that uses window dot current time. Let's say I have current time rounded to the nearest hour. I install a library that writes to window dot current time every second or minute. Now we're obviously clobbering. You can see how that could cause bugs and would break composition and restrict our ability to use libraries that were written with different apps in mind together. So that goes to the purity part of
Right.
it. That's why it's impure. And if you use those two components, but they are both trying to use the same state, mutate the same state, or read from it, they are impure, and now they can't be used together. Whereas sometimes you need a place of mutable state, and if I can scope it to this component, that means I've solved the problem of sharing the state. And other than that, you want to know when things are re-rendering, and this is just not for that. It's just like a reference to. It's just not for that.
Exactly. It's not. That's the best way to phrase it. It's not for that. If you want pixels on the screen, if you want it to re-render, you have state, you have props that use those. Use ref
Right.
to stash mutable value to just go to town, but not for rendering.
Yep.
The kind of interesting thing here is like I've seen and I've done this over the years, where you kind of develop this pattern where it's like a ref is not for rendering, so it's a perfect place to stash stuff from like the previous render. So there was like, for the
Mm-hmm.
longest time, there was like a use previous that wrote the
Mm-hmm.
value during render and then like updated it in an effect. I don't remember the exact things. I
Yep.
might be misremembering this, but um, it feels so easy because it's right there. You can create it, it's scoped to the component, it doesn't affect rendering. It feels like it's a feature. Um, but it's not. It's not made for uh, updating things that will be on the screen. So yeah, I thought that, I don't know. I thought that was
It makes it impure because if you update it with something like the previous count, you think that has made your life easy because now um, ref dot current is going to be up to date everywhere since it's updated immediately since it's a mutable box. But the problem is that um, it's a side effect to do that during render because earlier parts of your render could be accessing it. You could change it, and then later parts could access it, and it's changed. And React doesn't know that it's changed. And you could say that you only will read or write to it at the beginning or end, but you can see how this could cause problems, especially when you start to bring in components from libraries and hooks from libraries and stuff.
well. This is just, let's keep on that case. This is just you're modifying the ref, and it's in a ref you own, so it's not going to break composition. It's, you can still work with other libraries. It's, you're just working on it. The problem is React and React 18 introduced transitions, and transitions can say, hey, we can render your component as many times as we want, and then we can throw it away. We cannot actually use the output of it. And there's a few reasons why you'd want to do that, like routing or doing some like off-screen work that maybe a future version of React will have. But if you're modifying a ref during render and those renders never happen, like let's say you're taking ref and you're adding one to it, it's a number and you just keep increasing it by one. If React does 5 renders but throws them all away, all of a sudden your number jumped from 1 to 5 and you're like, what
Right.
what just happened?
Right.
Um, and so that's a case of like, you have a side effect during render, and because React expects your components to be pure, it should be able to run them as often as it wants, whenever it
Right.
wants, and it shouldn't affect any like future output of the component. You said earlier, same input, same output,
Exactly.
same
It's a hidden
input, same
input.
state. Yeah.
If you use it
And
in
then
render, it's a hidden implicit input, and yeah,
yeah. So yeah, I think it's great that the compiler now ships with a lint rule that highlights all this, because it is, man, it's really hard to think about like a hook like use ref not supposed to be using it during render, because it's something that's only in your component.
I mean, I bet we could just Google right now.
Google like
How
use
do
previews.
I get a ref to re-render?
Yeah.
Something like that. How to re-render when refs change. If use ref doesn't re-render a component, how am I able to type in an input box? This is like there's a million stuff here. Um, Code, draw control. If I want to load data when draw control is not null, I check the document callback. How do I listen to draw control changes and load data? So I'm starting to think like we've been having a lot of conversations about like our last week's episode. We talked about, use on scroll versus use scroll position and sticking in events the logic that you need if it's only about the event and it's not about rendering pixels on the screen. And now this conversation, I'm almost feeling like there's a way that you could teach React here, or at least break up the concepts, and you would put state and props in one area, and then you would put refs and effects in another, because refs and effects are not about rendering and
Correct.
state and props are. And you go between these worlds, um, but sometimes people use one world for what should be the other, um, and it's just an easier way to think about it. Um, a lot of times we use events to update the screen, like clicking on the plus button on a counter. So that's why the event triggers a set state. It calls set state. Sometimes you have an event that doesn't update the screen, like submitting a form. Submitting a form is an event, and then when it responds, that's like you can think of that as another event, right? Because it's like that's basically what you're doing with await. You're getting an event that's like the callback is popped off the stack. Um, but refs and events conceptually being not about rendering is like really making a lot of this stuff clear for us. So I think that's one way that also people could think about it. Another thing here is like we're talking about purity and it's like abstract. Just think about functions because components are. If people are familiar with like the Unix philosophy, the philosophy of pure functions and small utilities that compose together, what enables that is this notion of purity, is this notion of being able to run a function with the same input and get the same output. And that's why, Unix programs um, can be used together, composed together, can be piping their input into the output so well. And that obviously has stood the test of time
Mm-hmm.
and it's easier to reason about. So, yeah, this idea of composition, of the proliferation of libraries we have, um, is like a direct result of that. I think that's a really deeply held belief of a lot of the folks on the
Yeah.
React core team.
Yeah. How do you get composition? You don't have side effects, or it's not you don't, we need side effects. At the end of the day, we have to get paid, and we only get paid when data gets written to the database. So
Right.
we need side effects, but you mark those side effects in event
Right. You mark them.
handlers,
Exactly.
use effect, and but the rest, the rendering is side effect free, and
Right.
then now all these things can, yeah, like you said, compose
Work
together,
together. No spooky
render
action
off
at a distance.
screen, transition to render another universe, just all these goodies. And so we think the trick, the trick that React pulled on us is we think by using state, we reduce bugs because we're guaranteed whatever's in state, we get a render on the screen, and then it sneakily like brings in this composition thing, and without us even knowing, we get things like transitions,
Right.
composition with libraries, all this stuff. But like the only way we got there is by them saying, okay, you have to put, if you want to update the screen, you have to use state, and
Yep.
your components have to be pure. So
Absolutely.
love that. Oh, this is another point I wanted to make, that you said if you were teaching React today, I think if I were teaching React today, I would sit down with the person and be like, look, React is a programming language. It's not a library, it's a programming language. And just like in JavaScript, if you make some syntax error, your code isn't going to run. The console is going to throw up an error. You're just going to get some error that this code couldn't run. And because React is written in JavaScript, we don't always get that syntax error when we do something wrong. And so the fact that we now have a compiler with these ESLint rules that tell us like, hey, you're doing this thing wrong, reading a ref during render, you have a side effect in something that we know is supposed to be pure, they can blow up and they can refuse to compile our code and show lint errors and fail our CI suite. And I just love that. Like I just love that because I think it's the best way to understand React, treat it like a programming language. And although you can do these things in JavaScript and it's perfectly valid, you can't do them in React. React's much more restrictive. Um, and you get
That's
to
great.
reduce so many bugs in your applications when you do this.
Yep. Bugs that you hadn't even thought about.
Bugs you
Really
haven't
cool.
thought about. Yeah.
That was really well put. Cool, man. Um,
I've been thinking
yeah,
about this a lot because, like I said, I tweeted this thing and all these people were like, why can't you do this? Why? And I was like, oh, yeah, why can't you?
right. I'm going to be thinking about it a lot. I think a YouTube video would be really fun here, but it's definitely um, hard to explain if you just stay in abstract land. I think some concrete examples
Yes.
would be really good. Yeah, cool stuff. I like it. Regardless, I think it's nice that, like you said, you shouldn't. We love nerding out about this stuff, especially on the podcast and thinking about different ways to explain it. Um, we think that you should be successful without having to understand this at a very, very deep level, like what we're talking about. So that's, at least personally, a reason I'm excited about the compiler. If I was using Svelte and I made a new reactive variable with dollar, and then I try to do dollar dot equals, and it says no, you have to do dollar dot current equals. Or I would rather just be told because it's going to be a lot better, even if I don't fully understand everything until I'm a year into felt development. Right? There's a lot to React. It's a lot of think. There's a lot to understand at the depth that sometimes we talk about or like to think about, but I think exactly what you said, the tool helping people earlier, helping them find errors in the code earlier without having to understand it is a win apart from the deeper stuff that we're talking about. A big win,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, totally. You try to use a ref during render. Why can't I do this? Find a Stack Overflow. Tells you to use state. You use state and move
Right.
on.
Right. And move on. Exactly. And then eventually it happens 5 times and you want to understand. So you dive deeper.
Yep.
I just to wrap up here, the next conf came out and they have some new errors in their compiler layer as well. If you do like a data fetch currently in Next or before the current release, there was some implicit behavior there. And now they like throw an error that says you have to choose whether you want this data fetch to be how static and how dynamic. Just an example of this kind of thing we're talking about, which I think is an awesome principle in terms of just helping people be successful with your library, surfacing things early. So I'm excited to see this kind of trend happening.
Yeah. Very cool.
All right. Let's wrap it up there. I know we got a short one today, but we'll hit some of these other ones next time. And yeah, that's it for this week, I guess. Let us know on Front End First FM on Twitter. And maybe I'll make a Blue Sky account for Front End First. I've been cruising over there a little bit, man. There's some good stuff over there. It's pretty calm. There's some good tech talk going on. So a couple months ago, I would have been like, if I have to start a new social media account, I'm just not going to ever use social anymore. But it's fun to glance over there. Dan Abramov's over there, and he's always fun to read. So maybe we'll get something up there. But for now, you can find us on Twitter, Front End First FM, if you want us to chat about something, you have any ideas or questions for us, hit us up there. And otherwise, that's it for this week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Hope you have a good time Halloweening with Logan.
I'm gonna be eating a lot of Reese's. A lot of Reese's.
There you go,
peanut butter
man.
cups.
Oh, it's the best. Are you
So
dressing
good.
up as anything?
Yeah, the wife bought race car suits.
Oh, amazing.
Race car driver suits, whatever, for all of us. So we're gonna be a family, family of little race car drivers.
Do you have a name? Ricky Bobby?
Yeah. There's a thing. Okay, well, we're just gonna end it.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.